Okay, hello, and happy Monday. This week's episode is going to be all about overconsumption because this is something that I have noticed a lot recently, and it's definitely been a pattern that has fluctuated a lot in my life. And I definitely feel like this is something that we all go through, and I wanted to share this perspective on it. So, over consuming content, information, programs, um, books, like really this lens of, I find a lot of the time there's kind of two parts of this type of overconsumption. One is as a distraction. So when we think of social media, if we're not having a great day, if we feel bummed about something, if we're bored, we just can have that immediate indulgent feeling to want to just go scroll and essentially just distract and like numb out to not really like address what we're feeling or what we're going through. And a lot of the time we can overconsume to just essentially disconnect in those moments and not address what's really going on underneath, right? And I'll be, a perfect example of this. Like I have definitely been in that headspace a lot. And, it gets to a point where you're like, wow, I'm actually spending my days like coming home and doing that same thing where I'm like, I could be on Instagram for an hour. Or sometimes when we wake up, we totally get sucked into that world and just try to get through, that time by jumping into consuming other people's lives and other information, and really builds a space between ourselves and our inner world, and not addressing certain things in those moments. And so, and I always say this, like everything with moderation, right? Like for, if there is a time where it's like you have this really rough day and you're just like, I just need to like get sucked into another world. And whether that's also like binging TV shows too. Um, hey, we all have those moments. This overconsumption that I'm talking about is when it becomes a habit, when it becomes a pattern where this is like your automatic response when you have challenges, when you feel sad, when you're bored, right? Like this is what I'm referring to, is when you want to just jump into another world rather than connecting with your own. And when we get into this headspace, we lose sight of our own desires. We lose sight of our own purpose. We lose sight of, um, really where we want to go in our life. And we really disconnect from our values. And this can be at a time where you have this lack of clarity in your life. Um, this is something that like I've noticed in the past, is that like for me, if I have a lack of clarity on something in my life, like what should I do next in my coaching business, or really just thinking about like all of those things about my goals, right? And like where do I want to go? I find for me personally, when I have a lack of clarity, that's when I have tended in the past to jump into the outer world and consuming so many things that are outside of me. And I feel like our brains are very quick to try to find solutions. Like subconsciously, our brains seeking evidence in certain areas. And so a lot of the time we can get into this headspace of, I lack clarity for myself, maybe I'll find it elsewhere. And then we look at other people's lives. We like just end up not even wanting to look and indulge in, binging all of our favorite TV shows. And we lose sight of that connection piece of saying, you know, why do I have this lack of clarity? What is coming up for me? And really connecting with our values and our feelings in those moments. And I find a lot of the time, like, you know, we can be so quick to want to assess and seek external validation or external circumstances to either dictate or predict or try to understand ourselves, but it's all from external factors. So like, for instance, like if I'm not feeling um like good about a certain circumstance in my life, I might go scroll on Instagram, but then how does that make me feel afterwards? It doesn't give me clarity. It probably usually would then just bring me right into comparison. And in those moments, it's like, what are we really getting out of that supports our future self, that supports where we want to go? And I know that we can all get into like, dark times or spaces where we're just really in our feels. And there's always like a time and a place where we have that going on. And so that is a part of our journey, is like figuring out what works for us and how to help ourselves move through that. And so a lot of the time when we're over consuming, it can be, that we're not wanting to address our own behavior, our own purpose in our life. And we're trying to like grasp at other areas to see like, where else can I get this inspiration? And I feel like that's typically like where we go wrong, right? Is like we feel as though we need to seek it from outside of ourselves. And in the world we live in these days, it's so easy to fall into that. Like, TikTok, it's like as soon as you open that app, you're sucked into it for hours because you literally get all this random content on your For You page, and then you go into the rabbit hole of so many other things, you know what I mean? And so overconsumption, that's one piece of it. Is I find when there is a lack of clarity, we try to grasp at things outside of us. So my question to you in these moments would be, you know, when you have the urge to overconsume and just go into a rabbit hole, binge that TV show, things like that, pause and ask yourself, like, what is this really trying to solve right now? What am I trying to essentially cover and protect in this moment? And a lot of the time, it's really that deeper feeling to our beliefs about ourself. And this is the work, right? Is like really allowing ourselves to build our awareness around what we are sucking ourselves into on a regular basis to cope and to manage those thoughts and feelings. And so if you have this urge to be like, oh, I just want to go on Instagram and scroll right now, pause and allow yourself to notice what thoughts and emotions you are feeling. And in that moment, allow yourself to name them. So notice and name those emotions that are arising in you in that moment and connect with them. And if you're like, oh, I'm feeling jealous right now, or oh, I'm feeling upset at myself right now, or oh, I feel like that lack of clarity, allow yourself to lean into that a little bit. So that would be part one. And then part two of overconsumption that I find is when we feel like an imposter. And that imposter monster inside us can be very big and very loud sometimes when, especially when we're either in a new job or we're wanting to advance in our career, but we don't know what that looks like. And especially going back to, social media too, like we might follow certain people that are in the same career as us and they're doing more. Or you have colleagues that are like quote unquote really stepping it up and you don't feel like you're doing that, it's like there's a lot of moments where that imposter can tell us that we're not doing enough. And so then we tend to overconsume or overcommit ourselves to jumping into courses or content or books or, you know, programs or things to continue that level of like, I need to be doing more. And we live in this society right now where there's so much of this like hustle culture and productivity. And really, like we get so inundated with feeling this need to have to be productive and or busy, right? And that can lead so quickly to burnout. And so, I mean, especially with me being in the coaching space, it is definitely one of those things where it's like, oh, do I get the next certification to get the next certification to get, oh, another program under my belt to be certified in that area? Like there's so many layers of, oh, I feel like I don't have enough under my belt. And a lot of this is how we all feel in our careers, right? Of like, oh, I feel like I'm not doing enough or I should know more. And yes, obviously there's a level of like studying and building our awareness of like navigating our careers and whatnot. But as I said, in moderation, right? Like if we are really forcing ourselves and pushing ourselves and there's like no element of self-care and we're just like on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. This is a huge component of perfectionism where if you think about on YouTube, if you're watching this, you can see this visually, but like if you're thinking about, point A and point B, and point A, you're like, okay, I want to complete this certification or this program so that I can advance myself in my career. And then point B is like all the way at the other end, right? So it's like you've got these 2 points. And let's say you get that certification, you move a bit forward and you think that you're closer to point B. So you're like, oh, I'm going to keep getting more certifications or programs or read more books. And you think that, you're going to do that to then get to point B. I'm clapping because that's what we imagine and assume that that's what's going to happen. The more we get those things, we're going to finally check those boxes to get to that point B. But in reality, what's happening is every time we like tick something on that list, that point B also moves. You tick another thing, that point B also moves. And now, as you can see on my screen, point B is off the screen, right? Like we are now, every time we move that needle forward, we're expecting to get an end result, an end goal, an end thing where it's like, I have achieved all those things and I have achieved that success. And what's happening is we're thinking that once we get to that place where we are enough. And that's not true. You are enough in this moment today. Exactly who you are in this moment is beautiful and wonderful and smart and enough as you are today. And this is a whole, this is a whole episode on its own when it comes to perfectionism, but like when we are striving to get that success and check that box, and we're really doing it just to check a box and hope to get to that end goal, that end post is always moving further away. So then when you're in that halfway point and you're like, okay, I thought my goal, was right around the corner, and you're like, why am I not getting there? Then you start to get that frustration, but then you're still seeking it. So then you overconsume, you do the next thing, in the hopes that that end goal or that end result will be right there around the corner, and it's not. And you keep seeking that every single time you add another thing to your list. And then that becomes exhausting. And then you get really wrapped up in that like external validation and that external piece to say, why am I not achieving that? Or why am I not feeling any better? And so one, I want to just really say with this component is if you are choosing to take another certification or read those books and you find so much value out of it and you feel, really allow yourself to connect with the feelings you have while doing it. And that's like during something, but then on the next purchase or the next thing, if you're assessing, should I take this thing? That is also a moment to check in and say, am I doing this just because I feel like I should? Or do I do this because I really do have like a deep passion for this and I really just want to build my capacity? And you like really understand that connection piece of like, is this coming out of fear that you're not enough, or that you feel like a deeper connection with your purpose by engaging in that thing? So, and even for me, like I am a school-based BCBA and I'm new as a BCBA in the school board. Like I've done clinical setting for so many years. But when I first got that job, I was super excited and I bought so many books related to like school-based assessments and connecting with teachers and understanding certain components when it comes to being a BCBA in the school board. And there's like there's that fine line, right? Of like, yes, I want to build my understanding, but should I buy 10 books and go ham, right? Like that, it's like easing ourselves into, yeah, we want to learn. That's great. But like giving ourselves the space to take our time with things and connect with, oh, like, why do I want to do it? Am I doing it because I don't feel enough? And I am like, really connect with that part of you. So those are my two pieces when it comes to overconsumption. Part one was really thinking about if we are over consuming to distract or keep ourselves busy, or really just not addressing what we are in that moment. And that can come from a lot of lack of clarity. So in those moments, really allow yourself to pause, notice and name those feelings, and really connect with yourself and see what is really hiding underneath that overconsumption. And part two is more of that career-based overconsumption, where we are jumping to the next program, certification, next thing, hoping that that might make us feel enough. And if that's the case, then really allow yourself to check in with yourself. And similar to the first one is notice and name it when you are thinking about like jumping into that next thing or buying that next book, and allow yourself to connect and say, okay, is this a should right now, that like I feel like I should be reading this book or getting into this course, or do I truly desire it from like my deeper intuition and passion and value? So that is what I have for you today. And I would love to hear what comes up for you from this episode. If you have any questions, I am here. You can check me on Instagram at soniajmac.coaching. And I hope you all have an amazing week. And I'll talk to you guys later.